Good morning. Let me introduce myself. My name is Francesco Frati. I have the privilege of being the rector of the University of Siena, and I also have the privilege of being here this morning to give you a brief welcome here in Siena and here at the University of Siena. Let me spend a few words on describing what our institution is and the history that it bears on its shoulder. In fact, the University of Siena is one of the oldest universities in the world, with records of its presence here in the city of Siena dating back to the year 1240. There are a bunch of universities, not very many actually, in Europe, which appear to be older than the University of Siena. I don't know if any of you comes from some of these universities, but for us, it's a matter of great satisfaction, the fact that the history of this institution here in this city is so old. And since then, over these almost 8 centuries of history, the city, as you know, and the university had walked their way together, and they have reciprocally helped and supported each other and supported each own knowledge around the world. What you see today is a city still reminding its medieval origins, surrounded by medieval walls, and most of the buildings of the universities, including this one, are within the city center. And within the city center, most of the students of the university actually live, inhabit, and go to school, of course. So, in a town of just 54 perhaps thousand inhabitants, we have a university of about 18,000 students, so that the students make about 1/4 of the total population during the academic year, and the city itself can call itself a real university town, where students and citizens leave the city center together every day. I am particularly happy of having the opportunity as a representative of the University of Siena to host these courses here in Siena. And I would like to say that the University of Siena has dedicated, especially in the last decades, a lot of effort in promoting research and also activities with the theme of the environment and the theme of sustainable development. You all know that sustainable development is a fundamental part of the Agenda 2030 by the UN, but you might not know that the University of Siena started to get involved in this effort in 2012, when we became part of the so-called Sustainable Development Solutions Network promoted by the UN. And actually we did have a role in this region, being nominated Center for the Mediterranean subnetwork of the overall world network. So as part of this network, we gave our contribution to the development of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are part of the Agenda 2030. These allows me to say that we did took part in this effort very early, and we do have a specific engagement in promoting politics related with the Agenda 2030 and with the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We also have an international profile which of which we are particularly proud in such an ancient and small little city. This international profile, the numbers of this international profile are the numbers of research collaborations with other institutions all over the world, but are also the numbers of the students, the international students who come at the University of Siena as full-time students or as temporary students within short-term mobility programs. In fact, we have about 10% of our full-time students who come from abroad, from the rest of the world. And please consider that the average percentage for Italian universities is about 4%. So we're doubling the Italian average. And we also host over 600 students under the Erasmus program every year. Students who come to Siena attracted by the history and prestige of the university, attracted by the number of programs which are taught entirely in English, now counting about 1/4 of our overall programs, and indeed also attracted those students by the beauty of the city and the quietness. So we certainly are entitled to host such a course here because of our international profile and because of our engagement in research and development of the Agenda 2030. Having said that, I wish you a pleasant stay here in our university. I wish you a pleasant stay here in our city. Please refer to our colleague at the Department of Law or even to myself. You might have a chance of visiting the Rectorate building in these days, and I will be happy to host you there just to show the core of our university. And in doing so, I leave the floor to the Vice Head of the Department of Law. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Esteemed Rector, esteemed Delegate for International Affairs, dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to extend to you all a very warm welcome on behalf of the Director of the Department of Law, my friend and colleague, Professor Stefano Pagliantini, who apologizes for not having able to attend this preliminary session in person due to other commitments. You know, the Director is always very busy. Let me introduce myself. My name is Alessandro Palmieri. I am Professor of Comparative Law in this department. And just a few words after the speech of the Rector that has brilliantly introduced our university, our community. Let me first of all thank the University of Eastern Finland, the UN Environmental Programme, for the decision to locate here in the premises of the Department of Law the current edition of the course. We are an ancient university dating back to the medieval times. Our faculty dates back to the same period, but we are open to the international dimension of the legal studies. We strongly believe that international law, comparative law are subjects who have necessarily to be developed in the context of legal studies, although in the flow of our tradition that dates back to, as I said, to the medieval times. And the whole faculty is extremely grateful to our brilliant colleague, my personal friend Riccardo Pavoni, professor of international law and European Union law, for having took the role, difficult role of local co-organizer of this important event. And indeed, from adding something to what the rector has just said, from our point of view, the course can also be regarded as a high-profile initiative collateral to the activities carried out in the framework of the Jean Monnet module in European law and sustainable development, a project co-funded by the European Union and for the period 2016-2020. The project is coordinated by Professor Pavoni, and I am personally involved in the project as one of the members as a key teaching staff members together with our other colleagues of the law department. It is gratifying from my point of view, from the point of view of the law faculty, to note that the program of this course covers a wide range of very interesting items. Of course, the focus is on the main topic, the implementation, negotiation, and then implementation of multilateral environment agreements. But I'm sure that the ongoing discourse on sustainable development goals, and of course the legal aspects of this important initiative, could not be ignored during this course. Of course, especially the aspects of this initiative that have an impact on environment and environmental problems. So, as you have already understood, we are in a medieval town in the context of a medieval university, but as you have probably observed, this is a modern building, a modern structure with all the facilities, all the people in the department are ready to help you with in case of any problem or anything you need. And I'm proud that the main part of the works, the main part of the course will be held in the room where the council of the faculty of the department meets in the fourth floor, a very nice room with a magnificent view. And I'm about to conclude, but simply I would like to wish every success to the participants from all over the world. Enjoy your stay in Siena, enjoy your stay in the Department of Law, and I am sure that the next 2 weeks will be fruitful and will be a great success and a great advance for all the participants. Thank you very much. And now, Professor Luca Verdichelli, the delegate for International Affairs.
Just to thank the rector and Alessandro in thanking you for coming and for participating in this important event organized by the Department of Law. I don't have very much to add to what Professor Frati said. I just wanted to stress two things which are more or less connected with what Alessandro said about the spirit of the city campus. This is, as Alessandro said, a very old, actually one of the oldest university in Europe, as the rector also stressed. But we have this sort of continuous challenge. I used to call it the challenge of the Via Francigena syndrome, the fact that the more you discover to be more or less isolated in a very, very fashion and somehow traditional town, you need to be more and more connected, particularly to Europe, and the figures that my colleagues were mentioning were a good proof of the European connection of Siena in terms of mobility of students and professors and mobility of research outcomes. But also in a larger scale, and in a deeper perspective, I think that what we are going to face in this time and what we are going to do in the years to come is to bring Siena together with a number of other European universities in a new avenue for our research and for our mission, which is not just a mission of teaching and learning and making research, but it's just the so-called third mission of civic engagement. In this respect, our three main efforts are, of course, mobility, because we strongly believe in mobility, and this is basically my daily work. The second is freedom. The universities belonging to this system of European universities, particularly the ancient universities. Siena is part of the Coimbra group of the European University, which is the association of the ancient universities in Europe, strongly stress the aspect of academic freedom, which is an important challenge in many realities, even in Europe. And the third, of course, is sustainability. I think the director was mentioning our effort in this, and I invite you to visit the Santa Chiara lab, the Santa Chiara Center, where our headquarters for sustainability studies is located. In this respect, I think this summer school is particularly relevant. We are delighted to have this summer school here. We are delighted to have this connected to one of our 5 Jean Monnet initiatives currently at work, and this is also a relevant number for a small university like Siena is. So I'm just adding these lines in order to, stress the importance we give and the importance we do consider in having such an important initiative here with us. I thank you for coming again, and I wish you a very productive work and also enjoying Siena. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Tita Korvenoja. I'm coming from UNEP headquarters from Nairobi. I'm the Chief of Branch for Environmental Governance and Conventions. It's such a pleasure to be here in this beautiful city of Siena to follow up a course which I actually remember when it started like 16 years ago. So it's a long time since. And it's really nice to see that things are still going strong and it's evolving. So I have prepared a short opening remarks on behalf of Elisabeth Rema, who is the head of the law division, who was unfortunately unable to attend this time for the course. And I would very much like to encourage you after this opening remarks, please be interactive during this course. This is all, that's really the merit of this whole thing, to have possibility to exchange ideas, to challenge each other, and to really, question things. It's not that we as lecturers are here to tell you how the world stands. No, it's more for you to question us, and let's have kind of a very fruitful discussions. So just to start, dear hosts, participants, colleagues organizing this course, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here at the 16th UNEP University Eastern Finland MEA course. This course is being organized at a time when the science tells us clearly that we are not on track. We are witnessing unprecedented changes in nature as human actions are fundamentally and often irreversibly altering the biophysical characteristics of the planet. So we need to perform, we need to improve our performance. It's not enough what we are doing now. Business as usual cannot continue. And when we are spurring our commitments and action, the international environmental law provides a key tool for us to move forward. And here also we have to remember very closely what has already been referred to by our Italian colleagues here, the 2030 agenda. This is all about our mission to complete the challenges of 2030 agenda. This course is also about, we know very much about multilateral environmental agreements. And MEAs are heart of the international environmental governance, we know that. However, the rapid increase in numbers of the MEAs in past decades has been accompanied by fragmentation, conflict and burden on country capacity to implement numerous obligations simultaneously. I think there's always this academic discussion, how many MEAs are there in the world? Personally speaking, I use the figure 500 and more, but I've also seen UNEP publications actually saying that there are 1,300. But anyways, I think the conclusion here is that there are quite many, maybe too many. International environmental law belongs to the core mandate of UNEP. For almost half a decade, UNEP has functioned as an incubator for numerous MEAs and supported countries in implementing them. One of our key roles is to strengthen institutional frameworks and capacities of countries in the field of environmental law and governance. This helps to empower environmental ministries, mainstream the environment into multilateral system, educate citizens about sustainability, improve human health and make business greener. To keep up the progress, the development of international environmental law is critical, but it also needs to evolve so that it fits for purpose. It's not the status quo. The theme of this course, emerging issues in international environmental law, is extremely relevant and topical for our time. It brings us to fundamentals of international environmental cooperation and lawmaking. And I hope that during the coming 2 weeks we will be addressing a broad range of themes and responses that the international environmental law has to offer. But I also hope that we have very kind of critical discussions and thoughts about how to improve the coherence and complementarities of various instruments. For instance, we know examples from the real world that once we establish one new legal instrument, it might, if we are not very careful, cause problems to other legal instruments. So this is how to build up the coherence of the system. The theme of emerging issues in international law also challenges us to think a little bit out of the box. It's not only about the instruments, it's more about conducting business. What can we do differently? There is an increasing trend to step out of the conventional ways of carrying out international cooperation and involve those parties and partners and parts of the society who are not usually seated in the negotiation tables. And I really believe that we need to galvanize action in wider spectrum of the society to reach the goals. The recent Climate Action Summit in New York and the successful efforts of the Secretary General in involving cities, civil society organizations, young people, and the private sector demonstrate well how new approaches can speed up the number of commitments contributing to the objectives of the legal frameworks. To end, the 2020 year, I think it's going to be a milestone year. Maybe you already know why. There are actually now preparations for new frameworks, both for biodiversity and also for the chemicals and waste cluster. This means that we have an opportunity as an international community to think things differently. We can think of new commitments, how to set new targets, what's missing from the present frameworks, but we can also think of evolving the ways we want to do environmental politics and how we want to design environmental law. So I hope that this year will be something that we will also be looking into during our discussions here for the 2 weeks, because I think it really gives us a concrete opportunity to discuss how to move things forward on practical life. Thank you.
Right, good morning everyone. My name is Harro van Asselt and I'm a professor of climate law and policy at the University of Eastern Finland Law School. And also on behalf of the University of Eastern Finland, we would like to warmly welcome every one of you from all over the world that you've come to this course, the 16th annual course on multilateral environmental agreements. Just a few thank yous before they all leave the room. I wanted to thank at least the rector, Professor Frati. I also wanted to thank Professor Palmieri and Professor Vecchigelli for welcoming you at the university, but more broadly for hosting us here in this, what I think is a magnificent location, a wonderful city, a historical university, which at least we think will provide some additional flair and some additional incentive for good discussions in the coming 2 weeks. I also wanted to thank Tita Korvenoja and the United Nations Environment Programme more generally for again organizing this course with us already for the 16th time. We've very much enjoyed the collaboration with them throughout the years, and also this year it went very smoothly, and we hope to continue to do so in the future. Then I also wanted to express my sincere, or our sincere gratitude to Professor Riccardo Pavoni, who really made this possible, hosting us here at the university, also together with his Jean Monnet module on European Union law and sustainable development, really trying to again provide input into the program. We have a number of speakers from the law school who I'm sure will be excellent in the coming weeks to come. But again, for their hospitality in making this possible. Then another few important thank yous. First of all, also to the Finnish ministries. They're not here in the room, but it's being live streamed, so it's very important to mention this. So to the Finnish ministries of the Environment and of Foreign Affairs, which have been providing us with the generous funding that actually makes this course possible, and that have made participation of a number of us possible. So thanks to them also for providing us with the funding. And then the final thank you, and I'll probably say it again a few times throughout the course, is to Bradley Martzigela, who I'm just trying to see if she's in the room right now. There she is, who I think most of you have been in touch with already, but if not, you've probably met her this morning. And really, I think I can honestly say we would not all be here without her, including myself. So, having said these thank yous, my colleague Kati Kulevesi will say a few words about the history of the course. We'll talk about it probably also more during the course, and also says a few welcoming words. Kati.
Yes, hello, good morning everyone also on my behalf. I'm Kati Kulevesi, I'm Professor of International Law at the University of Eastern Finland. I'm also Director of our Center for Climate Change, Energy and Environmental Law, known as SEAL. Well, first of all, a big warm welcome also on my behalf to all you participants. I'm delighted to see you all here. And of course, also a big thank to our co-hosts from the University of Siena and of course from UNEP for excellent cooperation during the preparations for the course. And of course, special thanks to Riccardo Pavoni and the University of Siena for hosting us in these wonderful surroundings. As Harro said, our university, the University of Eastern Finland, has been organizing this course together with UNEP already every year since 2004. Our center, SEAL, was created in 2013. I'll talk to you a little bit more about SEAL, and we'll introduce ourselves, the whole organizing team, in the afternoon. So you'll learn a little bit more about us and our team then. So since the SEAL was established in 2013, it has been taken on the responsibility for organizing this course together with UNEP. As you know, so the history of the course is such that the main objective obviously is to provide training in multilateral environmental negotiations and to provide capacity building in that sense. And the course has been held during its history. It tends to travel, so quite often we've been in Finland, in Joensuu, which is the town where the university and the law school is located. But it has also been organized on different continents. It's been in Asia, it's been in Africa, it's been in the American continent, and this time we are now here in Southern Europe. And the idea, of course, is to facilitate the access of as many participants as possible to the course. We always, every year, we have a specific theme for the course. And as Tita mentioned, I think this year's the focus on emerging issues in international environmental law is particularly timely. I think it provides us a very fascinating opportunity to consider not only various substantive issues that are currently emerging in environmental discussions, that are currently being negotiated, but it also allows us to look at the sort of broader framework and structures of international environmental law and governance. And of course, as one of the key objectives of this course is to build your capacity as negotiators. So, of course, one big topic, in addition to the substantive focus on emerging issues, is on negotiating skills. So we will learn how practical elements of multilateral environmental negotiations, and you'll have plenty of opportunities through various exercises to practice negotiating skills as well. One skill that I've learned is very useful in multilateral environmental negotiations is that of flexibility to adjust to changing circumstances. So normally when you go to the meeting place in the morning, especially during the last days of the negotiations, you have the program and you have the agenda and you look on the screens and you realize that, okay, everything is not going as it says it was written in the program. And this morning we'll have a very good opportunity to practice that element as well. So after these welcoming words, I'll hand over to Riccardo Pavoni to chair the welcoming note session. But unfortunately, the second one of our keynote speakers, Professor Elisa Morchera, missed her connecting flight late last night, so she's still on making her journey to Florence and then to Siena. So she'll be staying with us the whole 2 weeks, so you'll definitely meet her. But so this is in order to practice how things work in MEA negotiations. We've had to reschedule her keynote address to 3 p.m. this afternoon. So we'll have the first keynote now, and then we'll have before lunch. There's going to be the first keynote, then a coffee break, and then we'll have the introductory exercise this morning, and then the afternoon will be as in the program, but Elisa's keynote is going to be at 3 p.m. So with that, I am very much looking forward to our interactions during the next 2 weeks, or 10 days rather, and once again, a big welcome to you all.
So I have little else to say by way of introduction, because we already had the pleasure of listening to our rector, our vice rector, and our deputy director of the Department of Law. So I will simply repeat that we are very honored to host this course here. I'm also grateful to my Finnish colleagues for having thought about us in this respect. I would just add one single thing, that we are particularly proud to host this course here, because I would like to mention that the Siena Faculty of Law, what was the Faculty of Law, now we are called the Department of Law, has a long-standing tradition when it comes to international environmental law and international environmental governance. We're back in the 80s and early 90s, the Siena Faculty of Law hosted high-profile meetings and conferences relating to international environmental law, especially in the lead-up to the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio back in 1992. I'm very happy to see Professor Francioni here is with us today, and will also be present next Friday at the roundtable discussion on Stockholm Plus 50. I'm happy to see him because he was actually one of the protagonists of, say, this emphasis of our Department of Law on the international legal protection of the environment. So welcome everybody. Feel free to come to me and ask me whatever you need by way of information, by way of assistance that you may need while in Siena. I immediately start the next session. As we know, we have Tita Corvenoja. Sorry for my pronunciation, Corvenoja.
It's very difficult. This is Tita.
Tita.
This is Tita.
Mrs. Tita, we have Mrs. Tita Corvenoja with us. As you know, she's currently Chief of Branch for Governance and Conventions at UN Environment. And she's a long-standing civil servant. She has worked for the Ministry of the Environment of Finland for some 20 years, if I well understand. She has particularly headed the unit for international and EU affairs at the Ministry of the Environment. And then she's also collaborated frequently with UN System, UN Habitat, UN Environment, and I think that some of the focus of her work was on strengthening UN environment, and that I think is particularly fitting when it comes to our session. And also she worked a lot on enhancing synergies among the biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements. So Tita, you have the floor, and you may start. The title of our section is actually, Is the Structure of International Environmental Governance Equipped to Deal with Emerging Environmental Issues? We will have a practitioner's perspective this morning, and as you just heard, we will have a more scholarly perspective in the afternoon with Professor Mogera. Please.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Yes, I'm not going to introduce myself again because I just introduced myself to you a while ago. I have been given this challenging task, actually, to give a keynote address on the topic, is the structure of international environmental governance equipped to deal with emerging environmental issues? And really, this is a practitioner's view. And I must confess now, as I'm here in the law department, that I'm not a lawyer. So you will hear now non-lawyer interpretation of the structure. So as said, yes, and my technique will be following. I will be showing you some slides, and I will go through my keynote. I will stop now and then to maybe give some food for thought or to add some flesh around the bones. And I hope that we will be still able to spend some time with questions or debate after my presentation. Yes, I will focus my presentation what I have observed in particular in terms of working with UNEP affairs, but I have also background working with some of the MEAs. But you will see throughout my presentation that there's quite a lot of references to UNEP, and I think this is very much justifiable. As we know, UNEP is the World Authority on Environment, and now the new UNEA governing body is really a universal body vis-a-vis the MEA Conference of Parties, which are still, kind of the specific legal instruments and only convening the parties who are signatories to these treaties. Just to say that our discussion on IEG is also very timely because it coincides with the ongoing efforts to review the achievements made by UNEP as the leading global environment authority since its creation in 1972 at the UN Conference on Human Environment, which is also known as the Stockholm Plus 50 process. And these efforts aim at identifying further measures to improve UNEP's performance as a central player of the IEG. So in my opening remarks, I said that 2020 is an important year because of these two new frameworks which are being negotiated, but I would now like to add yet another new important year coming up, and that's the 2020, the commemoration of UNEP. To start off, I think we always actually should start off by referring to science. Before going, if you're a negotiator in international issues, it's very important, you will learn tomorrow, we need to have facts first, because the politics vary, but the facts should not vary. So strengthening UNEP to effectively deliver on its mandate takes on renewed urgency because of the extensive, expansive and sometimes irreversible nature of environmental degradation. And on this slide are just few examples that demonstrate alarming environmental trends and their social and economic impacts. I won't go into these evidences of planetary crises because I'm sure you all know many of them, and which are repeatedly captured in the leading environmental assessments such as the UNEP Global Environment Outlook and the reports of the scientific panels such as the IPCC and IPBES. The state of the environment is continuing to deteriorate in almost all respects, with staggering 1 million species facing extinction due to human actions. Human activities are causing increasing amounts of pollution to the extent that this is now recognized as the biggest single risk to human health worldwide. So we're not only talking about environmental crisis here, we're talking about much wider crises which affect our the human health, the food production of the planet, even the economics of the planet. Before really getting started, when preparing this slide presentation, I started to ponder actually about the definitions on the IEG. What is international environmental governance? And there were so many definitions, but I just wanted to show you that here are the two which I found maybe the most interesting, and maybe after the academician has arrived, after missing a plane, we will hear more on this side of the issue. But just to say that growing environmental challenges began to be recognized as an urgent matter of public policy starting already in 1960s. And then we have these two publications which I really would like to refer to. One is the Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in the US, and then now that we are in Italy, Club of Rome report on natural resources. So since then, the international community has created a fragmented system of environmental governance which can be defined, and here you can see the different definitions. Rules, policies, and institutions that shape how humans interact with the environment. That's quite concise. And then you have a UNEP Governing Council decision, advancing justice and governance and so forth, which articulates it, information disclosure, public participation, implementable and enforceable laws, and implementation and accountability mechanisms and so forth. So really, I think one of our kind of risks here during these days and maybe even in the future is to start discussing these definitions, because you know maybe you will never find a really accurate definition. I think we have to be flexible here and just kind of have more pragmatic approach to what we are talking about. We are talking about the international environmental governance structure, which composes member states. It composes the multilateral environmental agreements, also the different UN entities, not only UNEP, and then of course so many stakeholders, businesses and so forth. So it's a big picture. Let me now go through a little bit of history of international environmental governance, and I wanted to start with the establishment of UNEP. The gaining momentum to take concerted action against the environment culminated in this UN conference on the human environment, which is known as the Stockholm Conference in 1972. It was actually the first conference to bring member states together to discuss human interactions with environment. So if you think in the 1960s, you got these two reports, the Club of Rome and Silent Spring, so it took some while. It didn't happen the next day that they called the conference. It was in this landmark conference that UNEP was created as the leading global environmental authority that sets the global environmental agenda, promotes the coherent implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development within the UN system, and served as an authoritative advocate for the global environment. UNEP creation also drew attention for being the first UN agency to be headquartered in developing world, along with the UN Habitat. And like I already mentioned, the 2022 marks the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference and UNEP, and discussions are currently underway on how to commemorate this milestone. Last week we had an annual subcommittee meeting of the Committee of Permanent Representatives to UNEP in Nairobi, and there we heard Sweden. They officially offered to host a commemoration event at the highest political level. But still, you know, this was just an announcement, and I think the work is to begin, and there will be lots and lots of consultations before we really know, you know, what will be happening in 2020. So this will actually only be the beginning, which will embark the preparation process. Then after Stockholm conference in 1972, I think then the world was ready to discuss the environmental problems and issues a bit in a wider sense. And we all know probably World Commission on Environment and Development, so-called Brundtland Commission, headed by the then the Norwegian Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland, which was established by the General Assembly. And they came up with the report of the World Commission, Our Common Future, which really provides now an authoritative definition of sustainable development. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So I feel that the concept of sustainable development, with its emphasis on economic, social, and environmental dimensions in a balanced manner, has come to define much of our development efforts in the past several decades, and it has also very much influenced the actual discussion on environment. And here again, please note the facts came first. Then to continue, after the Brundtland report, Our Common Future, UN Conference on Environment Development took place in Rio, the so-called Rio Earth Summit, Brazil. That's a milestone event conference. Adopted the Rio Declaration, the Agenda 21, and I also want to flag here that it initiated the three Rio Conventions, which are the Climate Framework Convention, the Convention for Combat Desertification, and the Biodiversity Convention, a milestone event. After that, in 1993, UN Millennium Summit adopted the Millennium Declaration and 8 MDGs, with Goal 7 on ensuring environmental sustainability. And here you see below, if you look at the slide, the MDGs. It's interesting. In 2000, actually now I'm looking at this, there's a mistake in the slide. It should be 2000, sorry. I just see that this is, yes, it's 2000, yes, sorry. So in 2000, the world leaders pursued this Millennium Declaration and 8 MDGs with the Goal 7. And just to say that although one of the MDGs focused on ensuring environmental sustainability, that's kind of, could be seen that this is progress. The MDGs were, however, criticized for having insufficient emphasis on environmental dimension. It was thought that environment was really put into one silo box, and the other MDGs didn't really touch upon it, and it was not really integrated manner. And then there were questions, well, is this really sustainable development? Do you put environment into one box? But I think that the MDGs anyways played a critical role in mobilizing the international community towards a set of shared objectives for collective prosperity. They also help to provide a perspective that we are all interconnected across countries, across sectors, and across generations. So even if there was not substantial connection so much in there, at least you had kind of set of targets and goals. And maybe this is kind of the first phase to the 2030 agenda. It was kind of improving the MDGs. Then, to continue my historical trip, in 2012, another milestone conference, UN Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio +20. So that was celebrating the 1992 conference, which adopted the Future We Want outcome document. Convened in Brazil, the meeting was, and there were a number of quite big outcomes or notable outcomes in terms of the international environmental governance and sustainable development at large. I will go into this in more kind of substantively later during the presentation, but just to flag, the historical perspective that this is a milestone year. The Future We Want document, which I mentioned, was adopted by world leaders first of all, and it transformed the institutional framework for sustainable development, and then paved the way for the 2030 agenda and the 17 SDGs to be adopted later in 2015. Also, as a result of the call to strengthen and upgrade UNEP, the meeting resulted in paragraph 88, which really went for strengthening of UNEP in various ways. One of the most important, I would say, element of this paragraph 88 is to make the UNEP governing council, which was then only comprised of 58 member states, to make it a universal body. There was also paragraph 89, which was more focusing on MEAs. And then, of course, one of the key outcomes was the establishment of high-level political forum on sustainable development. Before HLPF, we call it, there was a CSD, Commission for Sustainable Development, and it had been criticized throughout its years, that maybe it's not really functioning efficiently. So the HLPF was actually in response to the CSD. So after Rio +20 conference, we saw in 2013 first universal session of UNEP Governing Council, which was kind of global in nature, and first session of UNEP Environmental Assembly, UNEA 1 in 2014. And 2015, it's not on the slide, but like I told you, then it was the adoption of the 2030 agenda. So this is just the next slide. I think it's an interesting one. One of my colleagues has constructed it just to maybe underline the differences, how the world changed before Rio and then after Rio. So before Rio, you had Commission Sustainable Development, then we had high-level political forum on sustainable development, which is more cross-sectoral in nature and gives an opportunity for member states to critically examine their progress made and challenges encountered in implementation of the SDGs. I don't know if you are aware of the reporting mechanism, but the member states are asked to produce voluntary national reviews, which they then present to the HLPF. There are rotational themes for the sessions and so forth, so you get kind of a good cross-cutting of world, what's being done under each and every SDG in terms of, member state action. Also, the HLPF, I would argue, it involves much more, if you look at from the member state perspective, ministries and ministers and political decision makers outside the environment sector. So that's also the strength of it. It's not only so much focused that the environment ministers come and tell what has been happening in the world, but no, depending on the theme and the SDG which is being discussed during the HLPF, then the other responsible ministers or leaders will come up. Then, of course, you see here Millennium Development Goals. I already mentioned they were kind of, I would say they were the baby face for the SDGs. Then we got Sustainable Development Goals, which are far more, I would be integrated and broader in the sense, and trying to address to this question of problem of silos. And then, like mentioned, UNEP Governing Council, 58 member states, transferred to UN Environment Assembly with 193 UN member states there. So you see the potential of UNEA here. It's quite clear. And I wanted to revert back again to the legal instruments as the conferences of parties. So here you have a good instrument to do global politics and set the agenda if there is political will to do so in UNEP. Then, just before we get into more details and substance of the IEG, just to flag you one coordination entity which often comes up when we're discussing UN cooperation, because like I said, the IEG system, it's consisting of so many elements, so the coordination aspect is very important, and I think this is really the challenge for the whole system. And we are not only talking about member states coordinating with one another once, negotiating new legal instruments and so forth, or the MEA secretariats talking to each other. I think it's really important also to think how UN coordinates among itself, and we have actually a body for that. So it's called Environmental Management Group, and it comprises now, let me look at how 52 members, this is the right figure. I think the figure all the time fluctuates a little bit, but now it's 52. And they are all UN system organizations part of this. And this is nothing that the member states are part of. It's really the UN entities themselves. EMG is chaired by the UNEP executive director. So, and its really mandate is to enhance interagency coordination in the field of environment. UNEP is also being in the EMG as an entity itself, so it has kind of double role. The ED is chairing and coordinating, and then you have UNEP person, doing really, using the floor for UNEP issues, during the discussions. At the first session of UNEA, the member states adopted resolution 111, which is called Coordination Across the UN System in the Field of the Environment, including the EMG. And in that resolution, they requested the executive director to develop a system-wide strategies on the environment and to prepare a report with recommendations to maximize the effectiveness and efficiency of the EMG. So the system-wide framework of strategies has then become reality, and it includes guiding principles and action areas to promote greater collaboration across the UN system on environment in support of the 2030 agenda. It also seeks to strengthen UN system capacities and synergies to integrate the environmental dimension in their respective areas of work of different agencies. Right now, the EMG has a very interesting role. They are heavily engaged with contributing in the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, with a view of providing technical advisory input and to mobilize UN system action in the implementation of prospective framework. So I think this is something that maybe if we discuss later on how to strengthen the IEG and so forth, I think EMG is a very interesting body to look into. Well, then I already alluded that after this historical run-through of different conferences and that giving you the timeline of international environmental governance, we could now look into the more substantive issues, what's in there on the table right now. So as mentioned earlier, the Rio Plus 20 outcome document, The Future We Want, included this paragraph 88, consists of 8 paragraphs as follows. And these 8 paragraphs are really for strengthening UNEP and UNEP's role in this huge world of international environmental governance structure. And these paragraphs is there to help us to guide our work and to make our work more coherent and sound. So the sub-paragraphs are listed here, and like I mentioned, universal membership already many times. It's already there. Actually, the UNEA has been established with 193 member states, and it has also, UNEA has also 2 intersessional subsidiary bodies, which are not mentioned in here, but Committee of Permanent Representatives is one. Oh, actually, it's only one subsidiary body. It's the CPR under UNEA, and this Committee of Permanent Representatives then has different types of meetings, would I say. They are meeting in Nairobi officially, let's say, is it approximately, I think, 4 times a year officially in the whole constellation, and then they have these sub groups which meet much more often to give guidance to UNEP, especially on its work program and following up the work program. Before the UNEA session, we've had open-ended work CPR sessions, which usually involve the member states from capitals as well, and those open-ended CPR sessions are really focused on preparing the UNEAs and negotiating maybe the resolutions and so forth. The annual subcommittee of CPR, which I already mentioned, this is really the taking stock week of CPR when we go through the whole, all the UNEP sub-programs and so forth, what has happened there. And even in the annual subcommittee meetings, you do have the capitals quite often involved, so member states may be sending representatives. It's just only good to note that the Nairobi CPR that is not universal in that sense. It's open to all member states, of course, but not all member states have embassy or representations in Nairobi. So this is, of course, sometimes a challenge. So we need to have these sessions where we invite the capital representatives, first of all, and maybe those member states which are not usually able to be there to follow up. And also, I think now the modern technology offers so much, so we can have, teleconferences simultaneously. The second part of the paragraph 88 talks about funding, a secure, stable, adequate, and increased financial resources, UNEP voice and coordination. Third one, this is also about the EMG. I just explained you. Science policy interface, very important. Science is everything. It's the basis, We need that, and it's UNEP's task to bring the scientific messages forward. UNEP is not an institution of doing science itself. It's not a research institution, but it has a very important role in promoting the scientific results. Well, evidence-based environment information, public awareness, connected also to science policy interface. Then very important subparagraph F, capacity building and access to technology, because this, we have to remember this international environmental governance is not about an academic discussion of different political or legal mandates of institutions only. I mean, it's very much, focusing on how can we help the countries on the ground to improve the institutional frameworks for environment. For instance, like I said in my opening remarks, UNEP is doing a lot of support work for countries through really project work, helping countries to implement MEAs, helping them to draft the environmental legislation by model legislation. We have this Montevideo 5 called program just to trying to focus the support for the countries as efficiently as possible. So this is a huge area of work, very important, because if you don't have changes in the country level, how can you expect much to happen on international level, to be frank? Then we have paragraph G, headquarters functions in Nairobi and regional presence, how to strengthen the headquarter function, and also at the same time, because UNEP is not really so much focused on country level, but we don't have country offices so much, we work through the regional centers. So how can these regional centers of UNEP support the countries in practice by organizing these capacity building functions? And then, of course, stakeholder participation. So these are the elements of paragraph 88. Paragraph 89, like I already mentioned, it's about the multilateral environmental agreements. So it's also, if you think 88 is on UNEP's role, the universal role, and then you have 89, the other important element of the IEG. And the intention of the paragraph is really to promote policy coherence and improve efficiency and reduce the overlap. Here I have just clustered a little bit the MEAs, because like I said, there are so many of them. So how to kind of approach this question of MEA cooperation and coherence. So it's very usual that in the IEG discussion we talk about, first of all, clusters. So then just to mention you the three clusters, you have the 3 Rio Conventions, which were initiated in 1992 in a Rio conference, biodiversity, climate change and desertification and drought, climate convention, that's one cluster we talk about. Then we talk sometimes about 15 UNEP administered MEAs, and please note that out of the 3 Rio conventions, only CPD is UNEP administered MEA. Then we often refer to chemicals and waste cluster, and there we have the UNEP administered MEAs on board. And then, I don't know, yes, then we have also the biodiversity cluster as the last one. And there are many efforts going on to enhance the synergies and coherence among the clusters without compromising the independent legal nature of each convention. And we often, when we talk about the synergies work, we talk about either administrative work and synergies, and then we talk about the programmatic. And I think it's very important now to differentiate between the two, because these are also politically sensitive issues. For the administrative part of the synergies work, I would like to highlight the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention BRS Secretariat, which was established for the 3 conventions. So they have a joint secretariat and synchronized COP cycles for the 3 conventions. So I think this is a major milestone in administrative synergies. Then when it comes to the programmatic synergies, maybe I would then more look into the biodiversity cluster to say that, yes, there has been a lot going on. The biodiversity MEA secretariats have their own coordination mechanism called Biodiversity Liaison Group, which meets regularly to discuss issues. And here is really a big challenge how we, as UNEP, hosting many of these secretariats, can provide more support to the MEAs, so that through the UNEP work program we could very well support the MEA targets and priorities. This is an ongoing exercise, and I have now been in UNEP for 5 months, and this is one of the issues I really would like to, I am actually already focusing on, because I think this is one of the key areas, to look into more work. About the Rio Convention's synergies, I think it sounds so interesting and nice and attractive, but it's been quite difficult, to be frank, partly because, the Climate Secretariat and the CCD Secretariat, they are separate, and, they are huge conventions, they have so much to do already, on their own. but there are definitely things and ways of improving their coordination and coherence as well. And the conventions are actually, they are meeting time to time to discuss. They have this Rio Pavilion for their own synergies where they, flag their cooperation and so forth. The newest trend in international environmental governance now is synergies across clusters. Just to confuse you more. So we are not only looking at the biodiversity or chemicals and waste cluster, but we think we should increasingly look into the ways how are they interrelated. For instance, many of them, for instance, the peatlands, they accumulate mercury, just to say, very concrete, substantial, linkages between the two. So we should also be guiding ourselves not to be too much into a silo work. And now the new chemicals and waste process looking into the new framework beyond 2020 is looking into the synergies as clusters as one of its themes. So, just to move forward then. So this is maybe now you've heard the history of the international environmental governance structure, how it really links with the development structure, I would say, how the world visions development, sustainable development, environment is embedded in it. We have paragraph 88, strengthening UNEP's role in the system as an overarching authoritative voice in the environment, and we have the paragraph 89 focusing on the MEA synergies, which the MEAs being very important partners or parties to the IEG system. So I have just here tried to capture some of the context, evolving context of IEG issues on the paper, and to say that, as you already see, this is not about revolution, this is about evolution. It's like almost like starting from a human, development from Stone Age to present days. I think we could almost use the IEG in the same way, seeing how things evolve. So here I've just pictured a few points for you just to recap the presentation so far. So first of all, of course, adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015, very important step, integrating environment and development. HLPF, new body altogether, trying to break silos even on member state level, UN level. Let's come together from different parts of the organization and administration to discuss sustainable development issues. Regional, sub-regional forums of ministers of environment having increasingly more role, both in terms of preparation of UNEA sessions and especially for the HLPF sessions. Then we have, of course, the bigger picture, which I haven't mentioned yet. It's ongoing reform of the UN development system initiated by the UN Secretary General. Global environmental assessment, increasingly scientific evidence coming to the table. IPCC established in 1988, IPBES much later, 2012 I think it was IPBES. So we get more and more information. And then lastly, an interesting point, new actors and new ways of engaging in international environmental cooperation. We have been discussing now about the UN system, but the UN, that's an organization for peace, encountering all countries of the world. It's not an organization, a standalone organization, So UN is its member states. So how can UN convene all the different aspects of society and elements of and interest groups in a meaningful way to strengthen the governance? Yes. Then just to say I have still some few issues I wanted to discuss with you towards the end of the presentation. Now, we have been looking at the governance structure at a very macro level, I would say, and it's quite academic still, the discussion, right? What does it mean in practice, from practitioners' point of view? Then we have to maybe a little bit come lower to the level of discussion in the sense that to look into kind of details of the architecture, to give you kind of glimpse what we're really discussing in terms of IAG right now, especially when focusing on UNEP's work. I would like to just, once again, I already mentioned you about the CPR, which is the subsidiary intersessional body, Committee of Permanent Representatives to UNEA. And just to say that right now we have an interesting process going on, I will come to it soon, in Nairobi, looking into how to really improve and make UNEA and UNEA and its subsidiary bodies more efficient and lean, and supporting the international environmental governance framework. And this is not a new discussion. It's been going on there for a long time. And I think it's good. We should not be ashamed of that because, I mean, no structure is never finished. You need to have this dialogue, how to improve. And of course, the reform of UNEA or UNEP culminated in the paragraph 88, like I already explained. But then I think we have to maybe now look a little bit beyond that to get really into the practical level. So just towards my end of my presentation, I wanted to go through with you quickly about this UNEA decision 4/2, what it really entails. At the fourth UNEA session held in last March, a decision was adopted entitled Provisional Agenda, Date and Venue of the fifth session of UNEA. And this is an interesting decision because it actually incorporated substantive issues related to IEG in a procedural decision on the agenda. And you can see the different elements of that decision. Commemoration of Stockholm UNEP plus 50 in 2022, review of the efficiency and effectiveness of the UNEP governing bodies, how to do that, and then it also calls for, the decision calls for preparation of an action plan for the implementation of paragraph 88 for UNEA 5. So, the commemoration of the creation of the UNEP by Stockholm Conference 50 years ago, what does the decision text say? It says, request the ED, Executive Director, to prepare this commemoration in consultation with Member States. So this is really the mandate now for Member States to start the consultations, and like I said, Sweden has already come up and said that they are ready to host a high-level event if the Member States feel that there should be one. Then we have the second element, which is the review process of these governing body, UNEP governing bodies. And this is really how to improve the way of preparing for UNEA session, how do the different bureaus for the different governing bodies work and so forth. Someone might think, oh, why is this? This is very nitty-gritty and nuts and bolts, and why are you looking at terms of reference and this and that? I would say here and stop here and say to those who doubt this process, to say that, look, this is needed. If you want to have a world authority on environment, one thing is that it has to function well. Also, in terms of process, how it prepares its resolutions, how the different UNEA sessions are being organized, how are the different, preparatory committees held, how are they linked to the bigger picture of UNEA, how are they giving input. This is not really nitty-gritty, eh? It's fundamentals, it's pragmatic approach to IEG, I would say. So very much in favor. I'm happy to see this as a Secretariat representative, that the Member States are active in this front. And then the third element of this decision 4/2 is preparation of an action plan for the implementation of paragraph 88 for UNEA 5. And that might, of course, be a kind of a big question mark to some outsiders. Why are they asking for action plan now? I mean, Rio Plus 20 was, some time ago. But I think this just shows how challenging this, the 88th paragraph, all the elements, how challenging it is to really address them coherently and well. And there's always room for improvement. There are many sub-paragraphs which are still, need to be, we need to take stock more. We have to look into the way forward, how to move on them. So in that sense, I think this is a very good exercise as well in terms for the member states to look into the entire paragraph 88, look into the different elements and what should be done next. So to conclude, the title of this presentation was to asking the question, is the international environmental governance equipped to deal with emerging environmental issues? And I think, to be bold, I mean the environmental trend speaks for themselves. I think there's some room for improvement, right? So we have the indicators coming, presented by the scientific community. Also, there have been so many reports and studies produced over the years which underline the deficiencies of the IEG system from different angles. I'm not going to go into those. It's quite academic exercise. Just to say that there's, for instance, 2 reports from the UN Joint Inspection Unit, GIU reports, which look very kind of technically, I would even say, some of the, the systemic dysfunctions. And there's lots of room for improvement. There are plenty of recommendations in those reports. Then, of course, just to say that we have the Global Pact for Environment report, which is the so-called GAP report, which also, underlines some of the deficiencies. And then there are many reports on the MEA synergies produced. Why should the MEAs be, be working more closely together? What would be the benefits and what are now the disbenefits, because maybe there are some gaps in their ways of cooperation. We also have the Nordic Council of Ministers has just in February published a report. It's not actually a Nordic report, it's an independent report made by the University of Boston. But it's sponsored by the Nordic Council of Ministers, and that's a very interesting piece of work. If you want to have a copy of it, just please see me. Once my suitcase is back, it's lost now, I can share a copy. It's also found on the website. It gives you a very good kind of overview of the IEG system, and there are some recommendations there. So it's quite, I think for myself, maybe because I'm not academic, I would very quickly rush to this conclusion that no, the current structure is not maybe it's not sufficient to address the emerging environmental issues, and I would say not even the old environmental issues. So how can the international community adjust the structure of IEG to better deal with the emerging environmental issue? What is achievable realistically? So, the ongoing CPR review, I would say, implementation of paragraph 88 and the recommendations of the Global Pact for the Environment, the ad hoc working group, all in lead up of the commemoration of UNEP creation in 2022, offer excellent opportunities for us all to find adjustment to the existing structure. The ultimate goal would be to make UNEP and its governing bodies fit for purpose to effectively deliver on its mandate to support 2030 agenda and beyond, and also to increase the overall coherence of the systems. But when I was pondering about this with my colleagues, I also wanted to ask you very frankly, what is really achievable realistically? Is this more about evolution? We would maybe need a revolution, but I think we need to just go on with the evolution. So now a question also to you, how to go about it? Personally speaking, and this is just my own thinking. I believe more into this kind of very pragmatic approach, trying to avoid too much of an academic discussion of different mandates and what is, typical of sometimes, the heated discussions on the IEG, and go to the fundamentals. Why do we need this better structure? Why do you want to have more coherence? And this is all because of the countries and the world environment itself. So I think we have to kind of try to think out of the box here and look for the ways of working towards a governance structure which does not create lots of burden on country level, for instance. If you have so many MEAs which are completely not cooperating together, what does it mean? It means on country level that these countries who are parties to these many MEAs, they are really maybe overwhelmed with the burden of reporting and implementing. So the question about the international structure is that it should actually support efficient country level implementation, because the change of environment does not happen in these negotiation rooms. The change of environment happens on the ground in countries. So you have to get the countries on board and you have to support them well. So this is the kind of linkage which should be maybe, or should be definitely, in my own view, strengthened. And then I think there's also another aspect which is very important, and I find it very interesting, is this aspect of individualism. We are now living in an individualistic world, some people would say. So how can we increase global ownership and commitment across the societies? How can we as individuals or as citizens perform better so that we could link our everyday life in our home countries, in cities, in villages, to improving the state of the environment. So it's not only about discussing these issues on a global level, it's also looking into the mobilizing the world population actually for the environment. Is the structure fit for that? So then I think we have to understand that the structure itself, it's not the answer maybe. It can help us and support to do things, but we can't blame the structure. I didn't today sort my litter because the structure of the IEG is so clumsy. I mean, this is not the argument. You can always do a lot on your individual level. And way of doing things, I think that should be part of the new structure. Because I don't think we can, realistically speaking, have ever a really perfect structure for the IEG. We can improve it, we can evolve it, but then what we really need to do is to learn to do things differently all the way from trickling down to the individual level. So, thank you.
So I think we have time for a few questions. We have technical problem here is that we don't have a microphone on you, so either you come here and you speak on the microphone here, or you please speak loud and clear, and then we repeat also for the live streaming. It's very important that the questions are clear. So it's up to you who wants to ask a question, make a comment.
Comments are interesting to hear.
Reactions. Please, either you come here or we repeat your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you want me to respond?
Please repeat the question. Repeat the question for the live stream.
Well, it was long. I think what you wanted to flag is this, first of all, the lack of institutional memory in the system, and especially when it comes to country level, because the governments change, and also because of the governance structures vary a lot. You have the problem of silos, and it's a challenge of working across the constituencies, right? And there, I think 2030 agenda provides a really good tool. You know, I think that's really an excellent, you know, it offers an excellent opportunity for different government ministries, for instance, to sit together with the civil society stakeholders and all that, and try to formulate. Also, if I can jump a little bit to my old background as a civil servant in one member state, I remember we always had this problem of when we wrote our development policy priorities, that they were only tied to one government, mandate of one government at the time. So when the government changed, maybe the priorities went like this. And this doesn't make any sense country level, because you have this really, the country is in long-term support and, you know, kind of vision towards the future. So it was so frustrating. Especially in terms of environment, because of course the environment is not evidently always there. Climate has helped a lot, you know. Climate maybe is now already mainstream all over, but not the other environmental issues as such. So I see the predicament, but I would really then say, and I really believe into this integrated approach for the SDGs, and that the work should start on country level. And I think this is also a task of UNEP to be, in my new role, I can see that there's lots of work there. We could help the governments with true best practices and all that. It's also a very sensitive issue, because, I mean, as a UN agency, we can't go to an individual member and say, hey, please organize your way. Like, I mean, this is not our role. But we can come up with maybe some good best practices for those member states, how to work critically. And I think also the recipient countries could lift this kind of inconsistency of support more loudly in the international conferences. I think there's been a little bit of shyness there. Patrick, I see you.
Please.
I see Patrick, and then I see Stefania. Who? Huh?
Please.
Stefania. I now give you a secretariat response. I'm in hands of the member states when it comes to UNEA 5 themes or anything. But of course, I think the CPR-based review, looking into the UNEP governing bodies, gives us an excellent opportunity to look into the system as such. And part of the discussion is how to make UNEA sessions more meaningful, how to involve the MEAs during the UNEA session and so forth. So there is the link to the wider IAG. But how far the member states are ready to go, I think we need to leave that for the member states. The consultations for the CPR review are now starting, and so then we will see. But of course, as for UNEP Secretariat, we are there very happy to provide input and all that food for thought. And I think the Stockholm plus 50 somehow pushes us a little bit to our limits to discuss these issues. Huh? Now I think it's
We have a further question
Patrick
there.
and then, okay, hi. Yeah.
Yes. So my first words are, of course, thank you, Rita, for your presentation, and thank our hosts here in Siena and also for the University of Finland, with SEO for organizing this course. I think we're all very much looking forward for this next step
That was a tough one. Yeah, first of all...
Should we summarize the question for the live streaming? Because I'm not sure that the live streaming...
I think it was more about the means of implementation and how can the two things. One comment was, is fragmentation really so bad after all? Because it's kind of understandable in a sense, because you have the MEAs, which are independently legal instruments, and not all member states want to sign up to everything, so it's kind of natural. I think that's what you were saying. And the second thing was about the financial aspect, which actually I didn't touch upon here much, of the financing at all, and how can we kind of ensure that there's adequate support for the countries, to implement, and also to implement coherently. Well, I think that was So first of all, about this fragmentation, yes, this is now getting into the academic discussion. But yes, in a way it's natural, but there are for some places, like for the UN system, I would expect more coherence anyways, because the same member states, like the EMG. So I think we have to also think which fragmentation. MEA fragmentation, maybe that's quite understandable, but I'm not so sympathetic to this UN fragmentation, to be honest, because I think, even from the donor perspective and from the recipient perspective, it doesn't make any sense. It's not good for anyone, right? So what are we talking about? Then, yeah, it's true that also to being over-ambitious and try to fix the fragmentation by making these huge MEAs, umbrella MEAs, is it really politically possible? I remember when we were negotiating the Mercury Convention, I think it took like 10 years, to be honest. Yeah, it was 10 years process, so it's not very quick. And it was some member states were pushing for this more kind of umbrella approach, but it was just not there, So then in the end of the day, the politics told them that, the real politics was that if you want to have an instrument on Mercury, then you just have to focus on Mercury, and that's it. And then you have to leave the other ambitions to other, negotiations. So this is one perspective, and I can see that, it's spurring from the different priorities of member states and so forth. But for the UN coherence, yes, I think so much could be done. And also, even if these political or the legal instruments, they have mandates on their own, there's still lots of room for cooperation and collaboration. Like, for instance, the reporting for the MEAs, you can easily look into that, And some of these tools which are made available, I mean, they are voluntary anyways. It's just to help countries. Those countries who want to, make use of a better tool for reporting and trying to organize the work on country level in a bit more synergistic way. The opportunity is there, at least for the UNEP tools. They are not kind of coming to be imposed to anyone, but just, possibilities. For countries to consider. Funding is very important, of course, and I think in this, I would also say that the funding is quite fragmented, actually. The landscape for funding, we didn't touch upon it. We had the GEF, which is the funding mechanism for so many MEAs, but still, I mean, it's not really. You have Green Climate Fund now, which is a really new instrument completely, and then increasing discussion about the ODA. Because in many kind of, how would I say, in many donor countries, there's lots of political pressure right now, to make cuts in ODAs, and also there's a discussion, within the ODA family, how much we should or they should put to the environment side, and how much, for instance, to human health. There, I think the interlinkages and the sustainable development approach helps to understand that the environment is part of the bigger picture. But I really, personally speaking, don't think that the world environmental problems will be solved by ODA. It has to be something else. And then we have to look into this. It sounds a bit boring, innovative funding mechanisms, but really, and now it links to this, how to involve the individuals more and the countries, and thinking out of the box. That the structure, we can never get a perfect structure, but maybe we also have to look into the ways of doing things differently. And I really hope that through this kind of new involvement, like Greta Thunberg and these individuals, we can somehow mobilize this movement also, which affects the funding. You know, there was this discussion, maybe a cultural monument is burnt down, and suddenly you get this exchange of enterprises wanting to pledge very quickly to fix the cultural monument. In the same way, I think, why don't we want to have this very quick exchange of fixing the environment, you know? This is still missing, eh? Yeah.
I don't know who was first.
Yeah, I can't see anymore.
Speak loud, please.
Uh-huh. Yes, I agree with you, like that both of the 2020 agendas, both for chemicals and waste and biodiversity, are excellent opportunities now to look into things and make changes, also the way we are conducting business. Yeah, personally speaking now, because this is not just my... Well, I think there is potential, but we also have to be careful. I don't know, I only know, I haven't lived in all parts of the world, but just to say that we have to be careful with these extremists, because then that can also, you know, alienate some people, the people who are struggling for something basics. So if you have this, so you know, there are pros and cons, but of course, I mean, the kind of a pressure which comes from the street to the decision makers, it's there and it's real. But what kind of pressure? Well, if you have the extremists, then they have to kind of also think about the other side of the coin. And as a politician, you know, in many countries now there's lots of, if you look at the internal politics, it's quite split. You have this kind of green, liberal movements, and then you have this back to basics movement of people who felt that they haven't got a share of the wealth yet. You know, it's not enough. And they are not really willing to look into the kind of the other side. So how to bridge this gap You know, and this is coming to domestic questions, and each and every country is different, but to get the mobilization, we should get everyone on board, not only the extremists, but also the man on the street who is maybe focusing on something else than the environment, to try to make the links to his everyday living, you know, to see that what are the benefits he would or she would gain from, you know, protecting the environment better, you know.
Any further question? Any other question? Okay. So I think we finished? Okay.